Okay, I think we got all of the information. So, just double check. Con site speak first, by K-pop. Pro site speak second, Star River. So if no one has any problem with that, so Con site, feel free to start your constructive speech when you're ready.
Okay, so anyone not ready? Time starts now. We negate the resolution, framework, sustainability. If the increased spending on public infrastructures can not only mitigate the status quo poverty, but also prevent the future poverty, the judge should vote for Khan's ballot. Conundrum 1, transportation. Project Partner states that there are over 252 million people living on less than 15 RMB in China, most of which live in rural areas. Subpoint A, e-commerce and tourism. Transportation greatly helps the e-commerce and tourism by lowering the logistics costs. Some existing projects from Leo 2020 are the Jiangxi Expressway Network and the Sichuan Road Network. As a result, in Anyuan, a total of 2 billion RMB of turnover and 4.8 million tourists were achieved last year by the e-commerce and tourism brought by increased transportation, with 80% of townships and 32% of poor villagers getting rid of poverty. Subpoint B, rural businesses. Poor transportation also harms the local businesses. IIASA quotes, the development of township and village enterprises or of the TVEs are increasingly restricted by deficient rural infrastructures, poor transportation, and communication networks. With the increased transportation, as mentioned by Tom, the number of TVEs increased by 10.8 million in just 5 years. The average annual income for TVE workers is 12,000 RMB more than the farmer's average annual income. TVs also account for 40% of the total expenditure in rural areas for schools, roads, healthcare services, and pensions for the disabled and elders. Subpoint C, remittances. Transportation provides access to high-income urban jobs for migrant workers. According to Scientific Data 2018, increased urbanization and new transportation modes have become the biggest determinant for migration in China. The Journal of Comparative Economics explains how migration increases household income per capita by 8.5% to 13.1%. As Sun 2016 shows, a 1% increase in the access to high-speed rails can lead to a 3.4% increase in income. The migrant workers will further help their hometown's poverty by sending back remittances saved from their high-income jobs in the cities. As Jan 2008 states that if the remittances reach a total of 3,500 RMB per year, a family of 5 can move out of poverty by covering the education and healthcare expenses in the rural areas. Connection 2, forestation. Due to the desertification and natural deforestation, many of the poorest countries in northwestern China are vulnerable to sand dust storms. According to World Bank, those in mountainous regions suffer from the most poverty because of the lack of farming flat land, making forestation the most important production asset available in those places. China launched the TSFP project, which has restored 10 million hectares of dry grassland, as Xinhua 2019 states. Every 4 million more hectares become protected, and 120 billion RMB could be generated, pulling 150 million villagers out of poverty through job opportunities, such as forest rangers or wood manufacturers. 500,000 forest rangers have already been employed by TSFP. Forestry development contributed to a significant decline in poverty in project areas from 40% in 1998 to 17.5% when the project closed in 2005. Connection 3, education. Education is crucial to sustainable poverty alleviation. Global Citizen 2020 found an individual's low income increases by 10% with every single year of education they are provided with. However, Han 2019 quotes, local governments facing financial constraints fail to pay teachers and build teaching infrastructures and facilities. The lack of educational infrastructures or forms of salaries prevents the rural students from receiving high quality education. According to Han 2018, the teacher shortage has become a root cause of the rural-urban educational inequality. Many rural students drop out from high school and cannot pass the college entrance exams because of the low-quality teaching. Without funding, schools will not be able to attract any teachers with their disorganized and shabby state. In areas like Hubei province, schools do not even have desks and chairs, as stated by China Daily. Poor job satisfaction of rural teaching results in high turnover rates of quality rural teachers. Thus, we negate today's resolution. Thank you.
All right. Judge ready? Opponents ready?
Yes.
My time starts now. We affirm this resolution. When evaluating today's round, consider one sole aspect. 2,300 yuan of annual income is the Chinese government's definition of poverty. However, this should not be the sole consideration. ICH SSR shows us aspects such as age, illness, disabled, and education could all limit the ability to get out of poverty. If Khan cannot provide a solution for these people, the judge should give this point to Pro because increased spending on welfare is one most effective way to solve this problem. Our first contention is pensions. Pensions are a type of social insurance provided for the elderly people after their age of retirement. Most elderly people rely on pensions to survive, while China also has the highest elderly population, reaching around 158 million at the end of 2017. According to Hans 2020 from Science Direct, this also means that less workforce are able to cover the rapidly increasing elders. So the Chinese government has to cover the shortfall of pensions. In 2020, the shortfall would have reached 890 billion yuan according to Business Standard. Secondly, the current pension is not enough to ensure the livelihood of the elderly people. Since the average pension is 81 yuan per month, all of the problems leave the government no choice but to increase spending on welfare programs. In order to alleviate poverty from the elderly, Young 2019 from CTGN tells us that Chinese government has state assets that are worth 60 to 70 trillion yuan. Transferring 10% of the state assets, which is 7 trillion yuan, will be all that is needed to cover any pension shortfall. This means increased spending by 6.1 trillion yuan will give each elderly person over 38,500 yuan. Our second contention is about COVID-19 and its effect on impoverished communities. The first link we tell you is that during the COVID-19 pandemic in China, many are unemployed. Since the coronavirus pandemic, the unemployed have risen by 1% since December 2019. Individuals suffer more. Travel restrictions alone cost migrant workers 800 billion yuan in February and March alone. Combining the self-employed, this statistic could reach 1.5 trillion yuan, between 3 and 4% of China's total household disposable income, according to South China Morning Post 2020. All right. The second link we post is the amplified harms to low-income households in China. Rural education program from Stanford University, or REAP, estimated conservatively about 200 million rural individuals being unemployed. CAAS estimates that and tells us that 80% of the farmers are expecting a more than 20% decrease in income. This takes a toll on the expenditures of rural communities. REAP surveys across 7 provinces have shown a reduced quality of food, which leads to periods of food insecurity and malnutrition in vulnerable households. The impact presented by this is extremely low unemployment coverage. Laurie 2020 from PIIE tells us that less than half of the urban labor force is involved in the system. Less than 1/5 of the 290 million workers are involved. And none of the several hundreds of millions of farmers and workers living in rural areas are covered. In reality, the numbers are less. Marchisio 2020 from IFAD reports less than 2.3 million people in China receiving unemployment benefits so far. All of the problems above can be solved through increased spending on welfare programs by 800 billion yuan. More unemployment coverage and accessibility to rural areas will save over 200 million migrant workers from malnutrition, food insecurity, and losing disposable income. More coverage helps the most vulnerable and increases the effects, thus alleviating poverty. Our third contention tells you the effect of education on poverty alleviation and how welfare incentivizes students to go to school. The first thing we tell you is that education is extremely effective at alleviating poverty. World Bank 2018 supports how finishing high school decreases the chance of poverty to 2.5%, while less than 6 years of education increases the instances of poverty to higher than 16%. The reason for this is in high school and college graduate education guarantees a middle-wage job and basic financial income. The second link is dropout. Many students will drop out from schools to relieve their families' financial burdens. According to Cambridge, secondary school dropout rate reached 63%. Many decide to drop out in middle school. They pursue a trade to start earning income for their struggling families. The most effective way of solving this problem is educational welfare funding. According to University of Science Tech Beijing, there are 205 million rural children. Leo 2019 finds that every 10,000 spent on education welfare, 7 students get alleviated poverty. Based on this, 287 billion of increased spending is financial aid for the school expenditures, and family spending will lift all rural children out of poverty. Thus, we affirm the resolution. All right, I'm crossfire.
Okay. So, anyone not ready? Time starts now. So, my first question for you is on your last point about the dropout rate of 63% from middle school. So, if middle school and this entire compulsory primary education is this 9 years is already free, then why are these people already dropping out? How do we guarantee that welfare is going to work?
Judge, we tell you that the dropout not because of the free education problems, it's actually because that these families are too poor and they can't support these children to go to school. These children have to go earn for the family. Therefore, if we give financial aid to families, then this problem can be solved. Our question for you:
you talked about the middle school, right? But middle school is for the 9-year compulsory. It's supposed to be free. So
Judge,
if it's already tuition free, then why do we need to increase welfare in order for these people to go when it's already free for them?
It's not the education or if it costs money or not. It's actually that these families are too poor. So even the education is free, these students still have to go earn for the family. It's not the problem as if the education is free or not. So our question for you is: you talk about infrastructure allowing rural businesses. How will businesses be achieved without welfare and education?
Okay, we realized that in order to have township and village enterprises, we need the resources to move people and to move resources into these areas. We tell you that, for example, when we want TVEs, you have to move the people, you have to move the goods, you have to move all of the resources that you need for the company. And how are you going to do that? You're going to do that
However,
through
this is not
transportation.
true because
We
if
tell
they
you
don't even
that
have the
by building
education,
up TVEs, we can actually provide people with higher income. For example, we tell you how these people that work at TVEs have a 12,000 RMB more in their average annual income than the farmers.
however, it doesn't matter if these people don't even have the goods, if they don't even have the education to support their businesses and make it
No,
work.
once again, we're not only talking about, for example, you have to be, for example, a CEO or someone. We're saying that, for example, if there are people such that there are people who are already working in, for example, urban areas, and they want to build up a business in, for example, these rural areas, they have to move over all these forms of goods. You don't have to be, for example, some CEO of a big company, and you don't have to be a
however,
big
what
boss
are they
in
going to
order
sell?
to open an
What are they going to sell if they're in poverty?
What do you mean? What are you going to sell? They're not, them themselves are not necessarily in poverty.
All right, we understand. However, if they're in poverty, if they
can I
don't,
please answer? Can I please answer? What we're talking about is not just the people themselves are going to suddenly build up a company. We're talking about, for example, there's more area in rural areas and there's more land for them to use. So thus the people who are originally in urban areas want to build up businesses so that these are that the people in rural areas are able to work for them. So now moving on to our question. So wouldn't poor elders have to work in order to gain pensions in the first place?
we tell you that they have to work in the past. However, currently now, after the age of retirement, people should receive pensions. However, we're telling you that because
they didn't work in the first place.
Please let me finish.
Pensions only exist if you worked in the previous years. If you didn't work, then you can't receive a
However,
pension.
now the numbers of elderly people are increasing.
Thank you.
This is time.
Can we please take running prep?
Sure. So count us for running prep. Yeah, thank you so much, host.
We can start now. So is anyone not ready? Great. Time starts now. First of all, starting framework theorem is about how the pro-side should provide a solution for every single problem on the pro side. However, we see that is not true. We only have to prove which side is more effective, and we do not have the burden to solve every single problem on their side. But moving on to the first contention about pensions. First of all, we see that increased spending does not solve because the issue is about how the money is spent, not the lack of funding. According to Economics 12, the reason why only a quarter of migrant workers in cities were covered by pensions was because the system failed to keep track of wages. Moreover, more than 89.2% of all pension funds ended either disappearing or being corrupted, and they were either diverted or corrupted. More spending only worsens the problem. They say that 7 trillion is enough to cover any shortfall, but we see that these shortfall cannot be covered because currently there's enough funding. The problem is that the system has lack of regulation, and all these money are going to end up wasted and only worsen the problem. But second of all, we see that increased spending doesn't solve any problem. According to China Labor Bulletin 19, it explains that in order for workers to access pension benefits in retirement, they need to contribute up to 8% of their income in their own personal insurance pool when they used to work, meaning that the more you pay when you're young, the more you get. Increased spending from the government doesn't make any sense since you're paying for the pension when you're old, when you're young by yourself. But third, if they're saying that you should access from state assets, we see that it is only going to foster dependency if the government is just going to cover all the pension fees, even if you didn't pay the taxes in the first place when you were young. Then obviously everyone will be lazy and wait for the government to feed them the benefit when they're old. However, note that according to a report done by the World Bank of China, even with state funding, by 2033,
the National Pension Fund will have a shortage of 68.2 trillion yuan. Increased reliance on state funds only cause poor economy and even worse debt for the government. Moving on to talk about how this is going to help the COVID-19, they say that the problem is that 200 million people are unemployed, that the solution is not to give them more welfare, but to help them get employed. We say that we're not eliminating unemployment welfare, but when there's welfare, infrastructure helps by giving more jobs. We see that TVs, all these village enterprises are generated because infrastructure is built so that resources can flow in, and people can go out for remittances. We see that according to CGTN, created targeted job opportunity through infrastructure are enhancing and organized labor services is crucial to solve the aftermath of COVID-19. As of April 3rd, over 220 million poor migrant workers in 25 provinces have been organized through infrastructure to go back to their provinces and return to work, accounting for more than 82% of the total migrant workers last year. We see that the only solution here is to give them employment if the problem of their poverty is caused by unemployment. But then they say we can give them more welfare and 800 billion is enough. We see that the only reason we even reduce welfare in the first place is to keep the small businesses open. If the government didn't reduce welfare and if the bigger businesses are forced to pay the social insurance even without income as a whole and without revenue as a whole, the entire businesses as a chain will shut down from the huge costs, and in turn, many more people will lose their job. So reducing welfare is the only solution to keep businesses open in the first place. But finally, they talk about education. First of all, we see that if the goal is to keep students in school and prevent dropouts, the infrastructure does it better. Instead of just giving kids money to go to school, why not give them jobs to lift themselves out of poverty? According to January, an average migrant worker may remit 3,000 to 4,000 RMB. This money is more than enough to sustain a living and lift a rural family out of 5, as more than 3,500 RMB is able to lift a family out of 5 out of poverty. As these families are out of poverty, these kids no longer have to draw out of school, so the con side actually achieves the same result and the same impact as of the pro side. Well, the pro side only gives them welfare. Welfare only keeps you alive, and welfare doesn't increase your family income so that these kids cannot work and save for their family. We see that even with welfare, these families are still poor. If they're still poor, these kids still have to drop out to work. But finally, we see that the issue is with educational inequality. We solve this. We increase these entrance exams. We see that many kids are not able to go into high school or college in the first place because they are failing into the entrance exam. We solve this problem by increasing school access. According to Jan 13, closed schools were mainly located in small villages where inconvenient transportation had a large impact on elementary pupils. We see that many pupils are dropping out of school because schools are too hard to access. And we also see average class sizes have more than 100 kids with only one teacher. We solve this education inequality problem on the con side. Therefore, we're so proud to make it.
Okay, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, my time starts now. Our case's main thesis is that welfare is the one most effective solution for people without the ability to get jobs while a deficit exists. That's why you are writing pro on your ballot today. Responding to our opponent's framework, we don't say that you have to provide a solution for every single thing we talk about today. They just have to provide a solution for the people that are not able to get jobs in the status quo. If they cannot provide a solution, then this point should go towards the pro side. Let's deal with their first contention. When they talk about transportation and e-commerce, e-commerce itself needs phones, and many does not have phone access. For example, phone penetration is at 59.9% in China, which means that 851 million people have phones, according to Newzoo Global Phone Market Report 2019. According to the World Bank, Chinese population is 1.398 billion. That gives us 547 million people without phones, while Ma 2019 from China Daily tells us that 98% of administrative villages in China already have access with 4G technology, which means we turn this argument around. The basis of e-commerce means people have to have phones. In order to promote their e-commerce contention, they have to agree that we have to increase funding and then give them phones. That is the bottom line. Moving on to their subpoint B about local businesses. First, to start a business, you need a foundational funding. So the people that start businesses are actually less vulnerable than the people that does not start businesses. For example, farmers, even they said it themselves, like the people who can't start businesses are 12,000 yuan richer than the farmers. Therefore, the people we're helping today should not be the people that start the local businesses, but instead should be the people such as farmers, such as the unemployed people. This is the main focus because helping them will be the most effective thing to do in today's debate. Combining all of these responses, the most important response is that these infrastructures are not there. When they talked about success examples, they never talked about why they should increase spending and what is the deficit, what is the lack of transportation or whatever in these parts. Moving on to remittances. Okay, we tell you through responses for remittances. First of all, poorest families do not migrate. The overall impact of migration on poverty headcount has been modest, mainly because poor households do not have migrants. The poorest rural households with few laborers and poor human capital are unable to allow members to migrate. Even if all households had migrants, we find that many of them would remain poor. Thus, migration would not solve China's poverty problems by itself anytime soon. Two, it's a trade-off between worker and receiver. After remittance, workers are more likely to be in poverty. Using the rural poverty line of 635 yuan in 2000, they found that the poverty incidence of migrants was 17.5% before remittances and 27.8% after remittances, whereas the poverty incidence of other family members decreased. This means that it's a trade-off, and a trade-off is not effective because you're just using the workers out there to help the family members back then. Therefore, this is not effective, and this point does not stand. Moving on to the final second point about forestation, this is not a long-term job opportunity when they're just generating forests and then cutting them down as a job. Their entire framework is talking about sustainability while their contention to already violates it. Because of this, you should write pro on your ballot right now. Finally, moving on to education, we tell you that people cannot go to school, and that is the bottom line. When people cannot go to school, compared to bad school infrastructure, the people that cannot go to school, like 200 million rural kids, should outweigh their impacts. And education is more, and to clarify about education in their crossfire, they said that middle school is free, but people still drop out. The reason welfare can solve this is because you can give welfare to the families where the families cannot support the students to go to school. Therefore, they can have the money, and the students don't have to drop out and work. Giving them work is not effective because just giving them welfare to the minimum amounts can make their students grow up and be more effective at alleviating poverty. For all these reasons, you should vote pro. Thank you.
Crossfire?
Yeah, sure. I have the first question.
Okay, so time starts now. So first of all, can farmers work for businesses?
When you talk about the definition of farmers, is they work on a farm, right?
Right, they work for a farm, but can the farm also produce like products like fruits or vegetables for the businesses? Is that possible?
Sure.
Well, then why do they need to have phones? Can they just work and farm for these produces and work for the e-commerce?
Talk about e-commerce, right? When you talk about e-commerce, the basic assumption is that you have to have access to internet, right? And the problem is not with access to
First of all, we
internet,
tell you that is not true. That is not true.
You should increase spending on phones. Yeah.
We never said we have to increase spending on phones. We tell that we don't need every single person to do e-commerce and connect with Taobao, Alibaba. We see that farmers without phones can simply work and produce and work on the land, and they can produce the vegetables or the fruits. And one person can connect with the outside world, and one single person
can agree that your
phone is
impact is limited by the fact that you wouldn't increase spending on phone infrastructure or phone.
We're not increasing phone infrastructure. We're seeking our link and Warren is logistics, not phones. We say without roads, resources cannot go out and money cannot go in.
Expanded, right?
Excuse me, we're not saying our logical link is logistic. Currently, we see that many villages such as TVs are restricted. Our evidence directly says that they're restricted because there's not enough roads to connect and resources cannot flow in, people cannot flow out. The reason we solve this problem is because we build roads so that logistics are possible and the produce of these farmers
can actually be sold off to other places. Infrastructure for phones.
Can we move on to another question?
It's actually not effective. The only way to make it more effective is to invest in phones.
How do you prove that it's not? How do you prove that it's not effective?
Because you said only one person throughout the entire group.
How's that effective? We see that not everyone needs to open an entirely new business on their own, right? Businesses have CEOs and they have workers. Can we move on to another question? Overall. Can we move on to another question?
Yeah. So when you talk about like pension, or actually when you talk about unemployment benefits, why when you reduce welfare is the only way to keep businesses alive?
Because currently the reason
the welfare program, right?
Okay, so your logical link for this argument on COVID-19 is that there's not enough unemployment insurance. The reason behind this is because the governments are actually adding regulation that is saying that businesses right now can reduce the insurance they're giving to their workers. Why? Because we have to keep this business in line. Currently, right now, many businesses are going on the verge of shutting down because there's less income and less trade.
They still lost 800 billion on their disposable income. That's still going to descend them into poverty because they have a deficit in their annual income. Can we agree on that?
But how do you solve this problem with welfare? If you just continuously give them more money, why would they have any incentive to work later on?
for this period. For this period, the only problem is China did not give them
How
enough
long is
money,
that
and then
period,
we refund them
supposedly?
after this, so they don't have a deficit and they don't fall into the poverty trap.
Well,
where
then
can't
how are
fill
they
the
supposed to
deficit
find a
with their
job later
income
on?
right now? Time.
Okay, time's up.
Can we please run our prep time? Thank you. Okay, so is anyone not ready? Time starts now. We tell you that we fulfill both frameworks here because first of all, we fulfill the idea that we have to provide short-term and long-term benefits, but we also fulfill the idea that our opponent's entire framework is based off the idea that we need to find a solution to the unemployment that exists in today's debate. So first of all, on the first clash point, which is about unemployment and transportation, according to our opponent's framework, we only need to prove that we can pull these people without employment right here into employment. Our opponent's entire logic on their side is that if these people don't have the ability to work right now, they can only rely on DBOW and welfare. However, they're telling us how we're going to give these people welfare for a certain amount of time so they can be pulled out. However, we tell you that welfare is only giving you the basic survival. It doesn't pull you out of poverty in any sort of way. So what's going to happen is that more people are going to rely on welfare as a way to just have the basic survival, and they're not going to work in the future. So thus, it's just going to actually not pull anyone out of poverty. We see, looking at our opponent's responses to our points here. First of all, they say how welfare is better than remittances, but we tell you that we don't only have to do, for example, remittances. We don't only have to do TVs. We don't only have to be farmers. We tell you how, for example, TV workers' annual income is 12,000 RMB more than farmers' annual income. The second response that our opponents provide is that e-commerce needs phones. However, we tell you that not every single person needs a phone. We tell you that there are CEOs, there are also workers. So if urban area people are able to come over to these rural areas through transportation, this only shows that we're going to provide these people with a possibility of logistics and e-commerce. The third point that our opponents bring up is that we don't show a lack. However, we tell you that our evidence from IISA quotes that the development of township and village enterprises, or the TVs, are increasingly restricted by the deficient rural infrastructure, poor transportation, and poor communication networks. This only shows that we need to increase on the amount of transportation, and this only shows that there is a lack today. So thus, when we look at our side, we make sure that we close off the income gap between the rich and the poor by, for example, providing these people with remittances, providing them with a chance to get education and healthcare. Which moves on to our second clash point here, which is about education. Our opponent's entire point is about how welfare is a prerequisite so that people won't drop out. However, we tell you that first of all, DBOW and welfare is the basis of living. So simply because you have DBOW doesn't mean that you're going to suddenly be pulled out of poverty. This doesn't mean that people aren't going to drop out anymore because they still need to work for their families. So how are we going to make sure that they don't need to drop out? Is that we increase the public and the adult incomes, which comes up to our own first clash point. We also tell you that on our side, if our opponents bring up this fact that 63% of people are already dropping out, it shows that because it's already tuition free, but they're still dropping out, this only shows that it's because of the cost of the transportation. It's because of the cost of the resources. And in order to have better quality education for these people so they can be pulled out in the future, we tell you how the only way to do this is, for example, to provide these people with higher income. And how do we get higher income? We tell you that for every single year of education that you're provided with, an individual's income increases by 10%. So thus, we realize that overall, we have more long-term impact accident. We don't only look at the short term, such as pensions or such as, for example, COVID-19. So thus we stand on the concept. Thank you.
All right, I'm ready. So judge ready, opponents ready. My summary starts now. First, to clarify something in this debate, in order for opponents to win, they have to prove that increased spending on infrastructure can benefit the old people, the handicapped, and the unemployed that are in poverty. Because this point would go to the pro side if our opponents fail to prove so, because welfare is the only one most effective way to help these people. Now, the first voting issue in this debate is education. Both sides have this. We tell you we win this because, Judge, our opponents are talking about building better schools, building fancier schools that supposedly could increase the quality of education. However, we tell you that welfare should be put first because on the pro side, the problem here is not that if people have good or bad quality education. It's actually that if people have education in the first place. We tell you that 63% of students drop out in middle school, meaning that students aren't even getting middle school education. This doesn't matter how fancy your schools are. This still won't benefit people that are poor and they can't afford to go to school. Therefore, Judge, we clearly win this point because our problem can be solved through welfare and is a lot more urgent. Only if we put people in school, then all the fancy schools can be used and benefit students. Therefore, we should win this clash. Now, moving on, taking a look into our opponent's argument of e-commerce. This argument is not topical and should not be considered in today's debate because our opponents are not willing to increase spending on phones. Therefore, they're only benefiting people at the top 1% or 0.1% of society. Only people that have a phone and people that actually have access to internet, people that have knowledge and education, ones that they aren't in poverty are benefited. Therefore, Judge, this point should not be valid because the people in poverty are actually not benefited by this. Therefore, this point should not be considered in this debate. Next, Judge, you should vote for the pro side because our benefits are unique. Our opponent's only rebuttal to our second contention of unemployment benefit is that to give them jobs. However, this is not feasible. In all three examples we propose, we tell you that this cannot be achieved. First, if people are old and handicapped, there is no way for them to get a job. Therefore, welfare is the only solvency. Our third, another case we pose is in the COVID-19 period, many people got unemployed. We tell you that this benefit is unique to the pro side because it's not feasible or realistic or even beneficial to anyone to let these people go out and find jobs during the pandemic. Therefore, giving them welfare is the only way. And they counter this by saying that people will rely on welfare and cause welfare dependency, and thus they're not alleviated out of poverty. This is not true because firstly, we tell you that even if people rely on welfare, it's okay because we tell you that most of the people receiving welfare and DBOW, they don't have ability to work. Therefore, even if they do rely on DBOW and welfare, it is actually still alleviated out of poverty because they're above the poverty line. They actually can sustain a basic need of living. Now, Judge, we tell you that this is different because actually it doesn't give people a dependency. Because we tell you that through giving them welfare, it's the only way to alleviate people under these special circumstances to provide them a basic income. Therefore, we urge a pro ballot.
Anybody not ready for Grand Cross? Okay, so time starts now. So if your school is completely disorganized, you don't have transportation to go to school, and teachers aren't given salaries on time, then why would good teachers come over to these educational places, even if
First of all, it's not a you choose one situation, right? We're just talking about how we should increase spending in welfare programs because it's a no school versus bad school situation.
How's
We're
it
not
a no
saying the welfare,
school? Can
we're
you
not saying the
explain?
infrastructure is not there. We're saying the infrastructure is right there. That's why we should increase spending. Schools are already built. The only thing we have to do is increase
Quick
spending
follow-up.
financial
Is
aid so we
secondary
have the-
education the same as middle school?
No.
We're telling you 63% of students drop out of middle school.
Does that say
Meaning
middle
that
school?
actually if they
Can we
go to
check out
school or
the
not,
evidence
it's
is
not between
secondary.
if the school is there or not, or if it's good
We'll
or
see
not.
the evidence later, because if you're talking about high schools, it's obviously not compulsory and people are going to drop out.
Okay, you can have your
No, the reason
However, we think that this is
can I have a
actually
follow-up
important
to your
to.
question?
Okay.
Yeah, can I have a quick follow-up to your question? Yeah, so when you talk about people dropping out because it's not compulsory, that's not true. People drop out because they have to go to work to support their families. Therefore,
That's
if we
why
give
it's
their
not
families welfare, we
compulsory.
solve this
The
problem,
reason why
no
it's
matter
not compulsory
what
is that some people do believe that going to a job is the best choice for them.
Okay, so quick question. Does welfare make you rich?
No, but education makes
Right,
you rich.
so even with welfare, you're still below the poverty line, meaning what? The family
not
is
true.
still poor.
That's not
So
true.
so do you mean that you're going to improve welfare above the poverty line? Quick
Okay, can I
clarification.
have a follow-up to your
Quick
question?
clarification. Are you improving welfare above the poverty line?
No, we're saying
Yes,
that if we give
welfare
people
makes it
welfare, then
okay, yeah,
students
okay,
can
okay,
actually
okay.
go to
To the
school,
middle
and this
class.
can change their lives. We're not saying that we're actually giving people welfare so they're rich.
Oh, okay.
Right. The thing
Unemployment
is,
benefits
if
is
the
like
families are still
1,350
below the
per month,
poverty
right?
line, they will still be poor. Meaning that if the family is still poor,
Okay,
they
okay.
can still have to drop out to work. But even so,
Okay.
you're saying that you should increase welfare above the poverty line. Meaning what? I mean, no one will have to work anymore. Why? Because they'll still get the salary. They'll
We're
still get
talking
average
about
income
welfare.
above
It's
the poverty
actually
line,
right
even
now
if they're poor.
1,350 yuan per month. When you time that by 12, it's above the poverty line already. Welfare can
Okay,
maintain you
exactly.
throughout
If
the
they're above
poverty
the
line.
poverty line, they're not going to have the incentive to work anymore. What's going to happen is that
actually
more and
not
more
true.
people
People who
are
take
going to
welfare-
depend on the
People
welfare
who
system
don't
as
work
a
and
way
take
of
welfare
survival
are
instead of
actually
getting a
people who
job.
don't have the ability to work. You're just basing your assumption based on when they take welfare, they actually have the ability to work and choose
So
not to. Well,
how do you
that's not
prove that
true.
they don't have the
98%
ability
of
to
people
work?
cannot have the ability to work. For
How do you
example, they're
prove-
retired. For example, they're handicapped. For
Right.
example,
The thing
they're
is, even
students, right?
handicapped people can work, right? Even if they
What
have
about retired
decap,
people?
even if they
What
don't
about
have
retired
legs, they can still work on.
We can show
Judge,
you the card
realize
if
that
you
our
want, but
opponents
it's
are
cool.
simply just telling us that if you're, for example, or if you're handicapped, you should just completely give up and just depend on welfare for the
No,
rest
that's
of your
not
life.
That's
true.
not what we're
How
saying
many
here,
That
Judge.
is
We're
what you're
only
saying
saying that
because you're
people
telling
don't
us
have the
that if
ability to
you're
work.
handicapped, you
like people that are
can't get the
retired
job.
take welfare. Well, you are actually judge.
We
Our
tell
points
people
are
can't even
actually
travel to
assuming
the
that people
places to get
just take
pensions
welfare, but they
without.
have the ability to work. That's not true. You're just having a false assumption. Time. Thank you.
Can we run all of the prep time remaining? Thank you. So is anyone not ready? Okay. My time starts now. Couple of reasons why you should vote for the consent in today's debate. First of all, improving the rural economy. We see that we actually, through increasing infrastructure, we see that TVs are still not going to their full extent because there's a lack and deficient rural infrastructure, poor transportation, and communication networks. We see that the only way we can help resources to flow into the rural areas and that poor people can go out and escape the geographical restrictions of the poor areas is through transportation. We see that actually we're improving logistics by we tell you that a total of 2 billion RMB of turnover and 4.8 million tourists were achieved last year by e-commerce alone. And tourism brought and digitally transportation with 80% of townships and 32% of poor villagers getting rid of poverty. When we say 32% of poor villagers, it doesn't mean they have a phone. We say that these poor people can work for these businesses and sell their produce through logistics. Moreover, we also see we sold TVs. We see that TVs increased by more than 10.8 million yuan in businesses in the 5 years. We see that TVs account for more than 40% of the total expenditure in rural areas for schools, roads, healthcare services, and pensions for the disabled and elderly. We see that improving the rural economy is the only way to achieve both infrastructure as welfare, because without consumption, without the rural economy developing as a whole, there's no way we can sustain education, and there's no way we can sustain healthcare. Then we talk about education. We see that we solve the entire affordability issue by remittances. We see an average remittance worker is able to remit more than 3,000 RMB, and TV worker is able to earn more than 12,000 RMB on average. This solves because of these families are out of poverty by their own ability without reliance on these dependency welfare. We see the family is entirely out of poverty, and these kids no longer have to drop out. So we solve the affordability issue. But second of all, we solve the inequality issue. We see that many rural kids are not able to attend to school, but urban kids are able to go to high school. So how do we solve this problem? We solve overcrowding. According to China Daily 16, a middle school in Ruan has more than 100 person. And we also tell you that actually people having small classes have higher rates of graduating, and the only way we solve the root cause of education inequality is actually by building more infrastructure so that these kids can get the same education as the other areas have. Thank you.
Is everybody ready? My time starts now. It comes down to 2 points: jobs or education. When we talk about jobs, when our opponents talk about e-commerce, people are working for these people that have phones, which means that this actually is not to their full extent. We can increase their impact by having access to phones, by funding phone programs to give them phones and giving them access to the internet itself. Thus, they're not as effective as our solution. Next, when we talk about unemployment benefits, they think that the companies have to give unemployment benefits. That's not true. When you get fired from a company or when you get unemployed, the company does not have to give any of your expenses. It's the government doing it. Therefore, our opponents are actually mixing it up to company welfare. This point also doesn't stand. Finally, we tell you that during the COVID-19 crisis, they actually lost 800 billion yuan. That's why they're chasing their deficit and falling into the poverty trap. That's why we should increase spending on welfare to help them through this period. Finally, our opponents actually did not give any solution to the people that have no ability to work, which we told you in our case is 98% of people who take welfare. They just say we can benefit these people that go to work, but they never told us a solution for these old people. They never told us these solutions for like the disabled people, which has no ability to get a job. It's not they're impossible, it's that they go to many interviews and they get rejected because of their disabled nature. Finally, when they talk about pensions, they think that the old people are lying on pensions, but that's not true. They already worked for their amount when they did not retire. Therefore, when they retire and they get pensions, it's their human right and it's their social right. Finally, for jobs, our opponents did not give any clear budget. While we tell you 800 billion yuan can solve this unemployment benefit, and 290 billion can solve the education crisis. Finally, moving on to education, it's not a choice between like bad school or like good school. It's a choice between no school and bad school. Therefore, people do not drop out because of overcrowding in their class. They drop out because they have to work. Giving the families welfare is actually the best solution, and our opponents never responded to this. For all these reasons, vote pro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is the end of this debate, and the judge will vote on mini program, and when we come to the result, we will release to you as soon as possible.
Anybody haven't voted on this WeChat mini program? Anyone?
Give me a
Just
second.
minutes
I'm
and-
still voting.
Okay.
Yeah, I just voted.
That's a decisive vote. It's a 3-2 decision goes to the Kansai. Congratulations. Anybody want to start first, or I'll start first? Okay, I voted for the pro side for the reason that at the very first half, I really wanted to vote for the Kansai, but in the later half of the debate, the pro side giving me the impression that all the people in the society all deserve to leave, whether they are able to work or not. But the Kansai giving me the impression that even if this person cannot really work, they still do not have some other way for them to leave. They can just force to work, because even if they are handicapped, if they are able to move, then they will have to work and then to do something beneficial to the society in order to survive. And that really sounds inhumane in the later half of the debate. And also, the concept didn't really tell me that why this social welfare system cannot coexist with the infrastructure you've been talking about. Is that when you're talking about the infrastructure, to me, you've always talking like there shouldn't be any social welfare system at all, but only building infrastructure that can helping people in the long run. So for me, why I voted for the pro side is basically what the pro side and the world that the pro side creates that leaves the impression on me. And why I didn't vote for Kansai is that I didn't really feel that without any social welfare program, but only with infrastructure, could do as much as you have mentioned. But congratulations anyway. It seems that it's the final, so you've been the champion of this first tournament. Congratulations. I'll just go next since I also voted for the pro side. So to me, what I feel like is I think for me, while looking at like all the contentions and points raised in this debate, I feel like the pro side did persuade me on their analysis of education, and also like they did a really good final focus to me, and I think their answers to the job issue and employment issue is quite comprehensive. And though I did not buy pros like answer about like funding from like progressions like to like using that as a rebuttal argument to Kansai's first contention, although I did not go by with that, but I did like quite being persuaded by their analysis of education and employment. And for the Kansai, to me, I feel like you did a good job at illustrating how economic growth is being related to the infrastructure, but I really didn't like think you did like a I just don't feel like I don't think your analysis of the root cause of education problem in rural areas is quite persuasive, because also like in the first round of Crossfire, I remember you had this discussion about like how our middle school students like drop out of school because like this is totally funded by government. But I think the pro side did a good answer to that and pointed out about like different factors that actually how does that affect like the students to be like dropping out of school even though it's like free of tuition. So I think the pro side really did persuade me on the education part and employment part, but but also like Kansai did a good job. Overall, I think this is a quite very close debate for me, and I think both teams has been doing an excellent job. So thank you and congratulations to the Kansai.
Okay, so I will just start with my oral feedback. So first of all, like I vote for Kansai, and both teams did a really great job, and my decision does not define your capabilities. So basically, at the end of the day, when we come to summary speech, I finally decided I want to vote for Kansai. So basically, in the rebuttal speech, I feel like the concept gives more alternatives to pro side, and when she do line-to-line debate to each of the contention subpoints to pro side, and when necessarily she gives really clear evidences to support that why their whole impact outweighs, make me feel that they're super great debaters and have really clear logics. And for me, pro, when you mentioned about like compulsory education, so first of all, like both teams are struggling with like secondary education is middle school education or not. To be honest, like, there are some judges who are not Chinese. They do not actually know that the Chinese system, like how the educational system work. So remember that if you want to define this, just remember to claim to the judge that which kind of education system that you mention in your any of the speech to ensure that each speech knows that how this actually works in your case. Both sides need to pay attention to this. And when it comes to end of the day, I vote for concept because first of all, they define their own cases really well. Like the transportation and e-commerce and tourism. Pro did not actually give really solid responses to that. And also they rebut like COVID-19 cases and from like the financial burden at this point to the pro. And both teams still struggling with like people drop out of school because of like they want to work or because of like these are not compulsory education, so they feel like they want to work or they're lack of money. So at the end of the day, I did not know like to this question point that which side should I vote for. But if you want to win more question point, try to claim the judge that why you impact winning at this point. But both teams did a really great job, and for me, this is a really, really close debate. And I finally made up my decision till summary speech. So like congratulations for both teams for entering the finals and good luck for future debate rounds. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I also equally feel that it was a close to call debate and that both teams did extremely well. But however, I chose to vote for Con because I feel that Con provided like more evidence to support their claims and it was more quantifiable as such. It made their impact larger than that of Pro. So let's say, for example, I think that Con's rebuttal speech was excellent. She made sure that whatever she said was supported with evidence. So that is what sort of tilted my decision towards Con. And Con, I'll say one thing. I think that you guys should be familiar with your script, okay? Sorry, or the speech or script. Make sure you apply it because I feel that when it comes to the crossfire, most of the questions that you were being asked were in your speech, were things that you had already mentioned, but you actually failed to sort of answer it. So probably just make sure you're familiar with your script or your speech so that you can easily apply it when questions or proofs are asked. Regardless, both teams did extra well, and I'm really proud of you too. So congratulations to both teams.
I also live for Con, and I do believe it's a very close debate. I think pros engagement with e-commerce in summary specifically is not really enough, given that your response is basically telling us that, well, there's a scarcity of phone, but they've already telling us that well, we don't really need everybody to have a phone to actually be part of the business. And also pros, the COVID-19 arguments, well, has pretty limited impact from my perspective, given that it is incidental and the pandemic has already been pretty much relieved. So people do now have the opportunity to get back to work. So it doesn't really prove the uniqueness of welfare. And I think Kong's response to education, somewhere in the grand crossfire maybe, for like, well, you don't really have whether the welfare will suffice to incentivize the students to go to school. Well, this response sounds kind of weak, given that as long as the welfare does help to alleviate poverty in some degree, I do believe that it does provide more incentive for the people to not drop out. Overall, I think education is pretty much a tie, given that both sides have educational arguments, and I don't really think either side take out the education from the other side. And the next clash is also pretty clear, which is kind of local econ growth versus the group of people who are fundamentally unable to work. And I do believe at the end of the round, both arguments stand, and they do have really strong impacts. And basically, I made my decision based solely on who wins this clash. I ultimately give my battle to Khan on this clash. I do believe welfare is the only solution for the disabled. However, for pension, I think pension can sort of self-sustain itself by simply letting young people save more to prepare when they're old. And another reason why I think sort of con wings on this impact wing is because the developmental feature of the economic growth sort of aligns with the need to further increase the spending on infrastructure. Like, to put it kind of improperly, I feel like there's a better return of investment to say. But I think it is really close. I do believe that there's this huge impact to the minority group and the disabled people, but overall, I do hear responses from Khan to that argument, specifically on pension, and I don't really hear persuasive enough arguments from pro to cons like infrastructure, transportation arguments. So that's the reason why I ultimately give this clash to Khan. And congratulations for both teams.
Okay, thank you, judges. Thank you, opponents.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Good luck. Bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.